a long time before the Spanish arrived. But when the Spanish did arrive, they outlawed this festival. The festival included feasting and also sacrifice of animals and sometimes of human. Well, the Spanish banned it, but in the 20th century, the celebration was reintroduced with mock sacrifices rather than real ones, and is still celebrated today. The ancient Roman festival of Saturnalia is probably one in some ways that we're most familiar with, because it heavily influenced how merry old England celebrated the holiday. Saturnalia was a time for feasting and wild revelry. It was a time when social order was inverted. Slaves did not have to work, and for a short period of time were considered equal to their masters. And as I said, it influenced how merry old England also celebrated. In medieval England, Christmas was a wild celebration, much revelry and drinking and such. This is one of the reasons why the New England Puritan forefathers, when they came to New England, they forbade the celebration of Christmas. And it was because they did not approve of what was going on in England, the country that they had left. As a matter of fact, in Connecticut, people could be fined 5 shillings if they were caught baking mince pies, because mince pies were considered to be part of celebration of Christmas. Dongji in China heralds the arrival of winter and also is a time to celebrate the end of the harvest and such, and families get together and enjoy special foods from the harvest, such as tang yuan, which are rice balls. Some winter solstice celebrations gradually morphed into Christian-based observances. St. Lucia Day on December 13th is a festival of lights, and it's celebrated in Scandinavia at the time of the winter solstice. It celebrates St. Lucia, a Christian saint, and yet it also holds elements of a pagan celebrations that were in that area long before Christianity arrived, such as the use of fire to ward off evil spirits during the longest night of the year. The celebration comes from stories that were told by monks who were arriving there and were in the process of spreading Christianity. St. Lucia was a young Christian girl who was martyred or killed for her faith in the year 304. It is said that she brought food to Christians who were hiding out. They were persecuted and they were hiding out in the catacombs below Rome. And it is also said that she wore a wreath of lights on her head so that both her hands would be free to make it easier for her to make these deliveries. Lucia means light. December 13th is also the winter solstice in the old Julian calendar. And so the pagan festival of lights in Sweden was turned into St. Lucia's festival with the arrival of Christianity. You'll actually find that a lot of Christian celebrations have underneath them some ties to pagan celebrations and rituals and beliefs as well. The reason was it was easier for those spreading Christianity to be successful if they could somehow tie the rituals and observances of Christianity to something that the pagan people were already celebrating. For example, we are very familiar with the Celtic cross, with that ring in the middle. The ring represents the sun, because the pagans living in that area were celebrating this, or were worshiping the sun. And so when Christianity arrived, they combined those two together, took the cross and the circle and put them together into one symbol. St. Lucia's Day is celebrated by girls wearing white dresses with red sashes and a wreath of candles on their head. Girls who are not 12 years old yet get electric candles, but after they reach their 12th birthday, they are given real candles. Although St. Lucia's Day is not an official holiday in Sweden, It is very popular and very important. Many university students hold formal dinners at that time because it's their last opportunity to gather together before they return to their homes to celebrate the Christmas holiday. The modern tradition of Swedish cities and towns having St. Lucia Procession began in the 1920s, and it incorporates not only St. Lucia, but also boys participate too. Sometimes they wear white robes with hats that are covered with stars, and they're called stjärngosser, or star boys. And sometimes the boys are dressed as elves or gingerbread men. At this time of year, in many bakery shops and people's homes, they are baking what's called the lussekatt, or St. Lucia's bun. It's made of saffron. And St. Lucia Day is celebrated not only in Sweden, but also in Denmark, Finland, Norway, Bosnia, and Croatia. Now, as we continue our travels, we arrive in a country where instead of saying Merry Christmas, we would say Frohe Weihnachten. Advent is a very important element of Christmas in Germany. And Advent is very important, and they have Advent calendars. Perhaps some of you have seen how beautiful some of them are. The ones that we're traditionally used to, the ones that are made of cardboard or stiff white paper, and they have little doors and you open them and there are treats inside. But they can also take other forms as well, such as a great ring or wreath of greenery, and from the boughs of that greenery hang little bags and boxes with treats inside. Christmas trees are a very important part of the German Christmas celebration. Their use began in the Middle Ages and spread as Germans traveled throughout the world. The Pennsylvania Germans brought the tradition of the Christmas tree to America with them. But at the time, the tradition didn't really go out of or go beyond the German communities that were found here and there throughout America. However, the English queen, Queen Victoria, her husband, Prince Albert, was of German descent, and he brought the Christmas tree tradition with him to England. Well, once the people of England saw that their queen and her family had Christmas trees, then those people, the English, they wanted to have Christmas trees like their queen. And so Christmas trees became very popular in England. And from there, they spread to America and became very popular in America as well. In the 1800s, people in Germany liked their Christmas trees so much that the forests became rather diminished. And so the government passed a law that each household was allowed to have only one Christmas tree. Some enterprising soul came up with an idea of making a tree with feathers, taking a pole, wrapping it with wire, and then affixing goose feathers that were painted green. And voila, we had the first artificial Christmas tree. Germany is well known for its Christmas markets, like the one pictured behind me. They are found throughout Germany in cities and larger towns, and they sell all kinds of Christmas goodies and foods and such, and decorations as well. Germany became very well known in the mid-1800s for their hand-blown glass ornaments. And in the 1880s, the Woolworths Company, some of you may remember Woolworths, it was one of my favorite stores when I was a little girl. Woolworths began to import these beautiful decorations, these beautiful ornaments, and they became popular here in America. In some regions of Germany, there is a character who goes around with St. Nicholas, and his name is Knecht Ruprecht, or Krampus. He is a big, hairy monster with horns, dressed in rags, and carrying chains as well. And he is there to punish the naughty children. In other parts of Germany, there is a figure that accompanies St. Nicholas, and his name is Schwarzer Peter, or Black Peter, and he comes with bearing a stick to punish naughty children. Schwarzer Peter also is a tradition in the Netherlands and accompanies the Netherlands version of St. Nicholas called Sinterklaas. In northwestern Germany, there is a figure who is a standalone figure. He does not accompany St. Nicholas, but rather he is the figure. His name is Belsnickel, and he is a crotchety old man, and he wears furs, and he has a sack of toys and goodies for children, as well as a stick, so that he is able to reward the good children and punish those that are bad. And Belsnickel, the Belsnickel tradition, came with the Pennsylvania Germans to America. Hopping over the border, on a cold Christmas Eve in 1818, Pastor Joseph Moore trudged 3 kilometers from his village, Oberndorf, to a nearby village, Arnsdorf, where Franz Gruber, who was the church's, Oberndorf church's choir master and the organist, Franz Gruber lived in Arnsdorf. So Moore traveled to Arnsdorf to ask of him a favor. Moore had written a poem 2 years earlier, and he needed the poem to be set to music because he needed a carol for that Christmas Eve service, only a few hours away. And so he asked Gruber if he could set this poem to music. Now, the Oberndorf church had flooded recently. It flooded fairly frequently because it was right near the Salzach River. And so it had flooded, and it had put the organ out of commission. And so the music needed to be written as a guitar accompaniment. Well, Franz Gruber was able in just a few short hours to write that musical accompaniment. And on that night, Gruber and Moore and the local choir stood by the altar and performed for the first time that wonderful carol, Stille Nacht, Silent Night. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, alles schläft, einsam wach, nur das traute, ach, heilige Paar. Holde Knabe im lockigen Haar, schlaf in himmlischer Ruhe, schlaf in himmlischer Ruhe. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, Hirten erst kundgemacht durch der Engel Halleluja, tönt es laut von fern und nah, Christ der Retter ist da, Christ der Retter ist da. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, Gottes Sohn, oh wie lag, lieb aus deinem göttlichen Mund, da uns schlägt die rettenden Stund, Christ in deiner Geburt, Christ in deiner Geburt. The Salzach River floods fairly frequently, and for this reason, the entire village was relocated away from its banks in the 1920s. And at that time, a new church was built. And in that new church was put a small chapel in memory of Moore and Gruber and the writing of Stille Nacht. It's pictured here Stille Nacht is considered in Austria, a national treasure. And it's traditionally not to be performed until Christmas Eve. And any commercial usage of it is strictly verboten. Traveling south, we find one of the most important ways of celebrating Christmas in Italy is with the Nativity Scene. The use of the Nativity Scene was made popular by St. Francis of Assisi in 1223. He had traveled a couple of years earlier to Bethlehem and had seen where it was said that Christ was born. And so he returned to Italy and he asked the Pope for special permission to assemble a live nativity scene to better tell the story. The city of Naples is world famous for its wonderfully crafted nativity scenes called Presepe Napolitano. And live nativity scenes like this one are also very popular. Having a nativity scene in one's own home became popular in the 16th century. Before that, they were only found in churches and monasteries. They are traditionally put out on December 8th, but it is not until Christmas Eve that baby Jesus is placed into the manger. And since we're in Italy, birthplace of the Latin language, this seems like a great time to sing a song the language was first used by people along the river Tiber. And so this would be a good time for us to enjoy a wonderful 18th century carol, Adeste Fideles. Adeste Fideles, Leti triumphantes, venite, venite in Bethlehem. Natum videte regem angelorum, venite adoremus, venite adoremus, venite adoremus Dominum. Deum de Deo, lumen de lumine, gestant puellae viscera. Deum verum, genitum non factum, venite adoremus, venite adoremus, venite adoremus Dominum. Traveling north, we find ourselves in the Czech Republic. And you'll find that on the evening of the 5th of December, St. Nicholas Eve, children are anxiously awaiting the arrival of St. Nicholas. He is usually accompanied by one or more angels and one or more devils. He asks the children if they have been good, and then he requests that each one recite a poem or sing a song. After that, gifts are distributed, oftentimes baskets filled with chocolate and fruit. If a child has been naughty, a devil might hand him a lump of coal. You'll notice that here in the Netherlands and other places, St. Nicholas Day is a separate holiday and quite apart from Christmas and occurs at the beginning of December. The main Christmas celebrations in the Czech Republic are on Christmas Eve, and they have they fast, many of the people fast all day on Christmas Eve in the hope that they will see a vision of a golden pig on the wall, for that will bring them much good fortune in the coming year. The traditional meal is eaten on Christmas Eve. It often consists of fish soup and then fried carp and potato salad. Jessusek, or little Jesus, brings the gifts. And the children, while the children are assembled and the family having dinner, Jessicek brings the gifts and places them below the tree. And at the conclusion of dinner, a bell is rung in the other room, and the children know that Jessicek has left the presents and it is time to go in and open them. There is a superstition in the Czech Republic that if you throw a shoe over your shoulder on Christmas Day and it lands with the toe pointing toward the door, you will be married soon. The story of Good King Wenceslas comes from this area. It was based upon a Duke of Bohemia that lived in the 10th century. And a 12th century preacher wrote of that Duke of Bohemia's good deeds, saying, "His deeds I think you know better than I could tell you, for as is read in his passion, no one doubts that rising every night from his noble bed with bare feet and only one chamberlain to accompany him, he went around to God's churches and gave alms generously to widows, orphans, those in prison, and afflicted with other difficulties." His remains are in the St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague, and his Saint's Day is a national holiday. And this song tells of his good deeds. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel. Hither, page, and stand by me, if thou knowest, tell me, yonder peasant, who is he, where and what his dwelling? Sire, he lives a goodly hence, underneath the mountain, right against the forest fence, by St. Agnes' fountain. Bring me meat and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither, thou and I shall see him dine, when we bear them thither. Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's loud lament, and the bitter weather. Sire, the night grows colder now, and the wind grows stronger. Fail my heart, I know not how, I can go no longer. Mark my footsteps, my good page, tread thou in them boldly. Thou wilt find the winter's rage freeze thy blood less coldly. Therefore, Christian men, be sure, rank or wealth possessing, those of you who bless the poor will yourselves find blessing. Dropping well below the equator, we find that, like people everywhere around the world who celebrate Christmas, Kenyans enjoy the opportunity to get together with family. Oftentimes, Kenyans who are living in the city make the once-a-year journey for quite a while. It takes them oftentimes a day or two to get back to the small villages from whence they came. Or sometimes those in the villages will make that same long journey to the cities and cram all together to spend a few days with family.
Okay.
Christmas in Kenya is a very colorful affair. Houses and churches put up all sorts of decorations, streamers, balloons, paper streamers, flowers, and green leaves and all sorts. Some people have cypress trees decorated. Of course, there is no snow in Kenya, but some store owners take some fake snow and sprinkle it along in front of their doorways. Because, and also Santa might arrive by camel. They have hymns and carol singing and plays and such, and they barbecue beef and chicken and goat or sheep and serve it with rice and a flatbread called chapati. Their main Christmas meal is called nyama choma. And Kenyans exchange small gifts of food rather than large, expensive, or lavish gifts. As we continue our travels, we come upon celebrations for Panchaganapati, a modern winter holiday with family-centered activities. That it was created a few decades ago as sort of the Hindu alternative or the Hindu answer to Christmas. And it takes place between December 21st and 25th and worships the Lord Ganesha, the elephant-headed Lord who is the Lord of culture and new beginnings. Family members work at mending past mistakes and at bringing Ganesha's joy and harmony into the 5 areas of their lives. That's family, friends, acquaintances, religion, and culture. Each day, a tray of sweets, fruits, and incense is assembled, oftentimes by the children of the household, and placed before Ganesha. Each day, too, children and adults receive a brightly wrapped gift, which is also put before Ganesha. And then the last day of the celebration, all of the gifts are opened. For people who follow the Buddhist faith, Bodhi Day on December 8th commemorates the Buddha's achievement of nirvana. And those who celebrate this may include additional meditation, study, chanting of Buddhist texts, going around doing good deeds for others, and some may enjoy a traditional meal of tea and cake. Christmas is not widely celebrated in Israel, as only a small percentage of the population is Christian. Instead, Hanukkah is celebrated, although it's not a national holiday, and it does not carry the same weight in the Jewish faith as Christmas does for Christians. Hanukkah this year was from December 10th to December 18th, and it's a different date each year because it's based upon the Jewish calendar. And it's the first day of Hanukkah is the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev. Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 160 BC. The great Greek king Antiochus had invaded the area, and eventually the priest Matthias, along with his son Judas Maccabee and their band of soldiers called the Maccabees, were able to drive out Antiochus and drive him from Judea. They then set about rebuilding the temple, and as part of that also the altar, and wanting to relight the candles, the lights there upon the altar. It's said that the soldiers only had enough oil for one night of burning, and yet miraculously the oil lasted for 8 nights, and therefore it became the miracle of lights. Although most people use the word menorah when talking about this, what's actually lit is called a Hanukkah, and it's different than a menorah in that it has a 9th candle, which is called the shamash, and it's used to light the other candles. Families gather together, and each night they light one of the candles and play dreidel games and enjoy special foods such as a pastry that's sort of like a jelly donut, and also potato latkes or potato pancakes, which both of those food items are cooked in oil as part of the commemoration of oil. In Russia, Christmas is normally celebrated on January 7th. The date is different because the Russian Orthodox Church uses the old Julian calendar in setting out the dates for all of their holidays. However, the new year is really the time for celebration. Christmas is considered a smaller, more private and quiet, more religious affair. And also on New Year is when Grandfather Frost, or Ded Moroz, comes and brings gifts. He is always accompanied by his granddaughter, Snegorochka. On New Year's Eve, children gather around the Christmas tree and wait in anticipation for Ded Moroz's arrival. And when he does come, he distributes gifts. Next, we find ourselves in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, the most popular decoration is called the parol. It's pictured here, and it's a lovely illuminated lantern. They're hung on the end of long poles, and they are made by taking bamboo sticks and putting them together and then stretching over them cellophane and Japanese paper. And they celebrate, they commemorate the star that was followed by the wise men. Crossing the Pacific Ocean, we find ourselves in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, where it is traditional for people to roller skate to the church services that take place between the 16th and the 24th of December every morning. The roads are often closed to traffic by 8 a.m. to make it safe for people to travel. And if anybody was thinking that they were going to sleep in and miss the church service, many neighborhoods and people in the neighborhoods set off firecrackers and other noisemakers to make sure that everybody is up and awake and ready to go to those early morning church services. Christmas trees are rare, and the most important decoration in almost every household is a nativity scene. Some children believe that baby Jesus, rather than Santa Claus, delivers the gifts. Traditional Venezuelan foods include hallacas, a mixture of chicken, pork, beef, capers, olives, and raisins, all wrapped together in either maize or plantain leaves and steamed or boiled. In neighboring Ecuador, families dress a straw man in old clothes on New Year's Eve, and then they write a will for him. And upon that will, they write down all of their faults. And then they set him on fire on New Year's Eve. And the hope is that as he burns up, so too will all of their faults. Well, that's been quite a journey as we've traveled around the world. And I think I am ready and hope you are ready for a fireside Christmas story. There are so many wonderful stories that have been written through hundreds of years, really, about Christmas. Perhaps the most beloved, in some ways anyways, is A Christmas Carol, written by Charles Dickens. Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in just a few weeks' time before Christmas of 1845. He himself was very familiar with poverty. His father had been sent to debtor's prison, and Dickens was forced to leave school and go to labor in a factory. This early experience and the plight of the poor that he saw all around him influenced his writing for the rest of his life. Today, though, I'm going to share with you a lesser-known story that I think embodies the seasoned spirit of charity and selflessness and serves as an inspiration for all who seek the true meaning behind the glitter of the holiday. This story was written by author Sophie Sweat over 60 years ago. How Santa Claus Found the Poorhouse. Heliogabalus was shoveling snow. The snow was very deep, and the path from the front door to the road was a long one, and the shovel was almost as big as Heliogabalus. But Gobailey, as everyone called him for short, didn't give up easily. You might have known that he wouldn't give up easily by one glance at his sturdy little figure, at his bright, wide-open eyes, his firm mouth, and his square, prominent chin. Even the little turned-up end of his nose looked resolute. Besides, Mrs. Pincham had told him to shovel out the path, and she had a switch behind the woodshed door. Mrs. Pincham kept the poor farm, and Gobailey was town's poor. The boys sometimes called him that when he went to coast on Three Pine Hill, or to see the skating on the mill pond, and sometimes, too, they made fun of his clothes. But it was only the boys who were a great deal bigger than he who would dare to make fun of Gobailey. And even some of them ran when he doubled up his fists. But Methuselah, I don't know what would have become of Methuselah if he had not had Gobailey to defend him. For he was a delicate little fellow, spindling and good for nothing, Mrs. Pincham called him, and he had come to her in a basket. In other words, Methuselah was a foundling. Mrs. Pincham didn't think much of children who came in a basket from nobody knew where. It didn't seem to belong to Poplarville to support him, since he didn't belong to anybody that ever lived there, and his keep and his medicine cost more than he would ever be worth to anybody. Go Bailey, he was strong and willing and did a great deal of work. Mrs. Pincham could put up with Go Bailey, but Methuselah, she said, was a thorn in her side. And now, after being a trial all his life, he had a hip disease, which the doctor feared was incurable and which made him more troublesome still. But after all, Mrs. Pincham wasn't quite so bad as one would have thought from her talk. She must have had a soft spot somewhere in her heart, for she put plums in Methuselah's porridge now that he was ill, and once she had let Go Bailey leave his wood chopping to draw Methuselah out on his sled. I suppose there is a soft spot in everybody's heart, only sometimes it isn't very easy to find it. And Mrs. Pincham might not have been so cross if she had led an easier life. There were a good many odd people in the poorhouse, flighty in their heads and wearing in their ways, she said, and sometimes they must have been quite trying to her patience. Once in a great while, indeed, Mrs. Pincham was good-natured, and then sometimes for a whole evening the poorhouse would seem like home. All those who lived there would sit around the fire and roast apples, and Mrs. Pincham would even unlock the closet under the back stairs where there was a great bag full of nuts. And Uncle Sim would tell stories. But it happened very unfortunately that Mrs. Pincham never had one of her good-natured days on Thanksgiving or Christmas or any holiday. She was sure to say on those days that she was all tried to pieces. And everybody was frightened and unhappy when Mrs. Pincham was all tried to pieces. And so that was the reason why Go Bailey's heart sank as he remembered, while he was shoveling the path through the snow, that the next day was Christmas. Some people from the village went by with a Christmas tree which they had cut down in the woods. "Why, that's the poorhouse. It's never Christmas there," shouted one child. Poor Go Bailey's heart sank still more as he caught these words, and somehow he felt very tired and minded the cold as he had not thought of minding it a moment before. For though Go Bailey was stout-hearted, he didn't like to be reminded that he was town's poor and that Christmas was nothing to him. Just then he caught sight of Methuselah's little pinched face pressed against the window pane. Methuselah always had, even when he was a baby, a wan and pallid face, like a little old man, and that's why they called him Methuselah. Methuselah was never quite happy when Go Bailey was out of his sight. Go Bailey went up to the window. "Tomorrow's Christmas, Thusalie," he said. "Is it? Do you suppose she knows it? She'll be all tried to pieces, won't she?" She always meant Mrs. Pincham. Go Bailey was sadly afraid she would, but he said cheerfully, "Maybe she won't. Maybe she'll let me take you out on my sled. And one Christmas, there was turkey and plum pudding." "Must have been a good many Christmases ago. I can't remember it," said Methuselah. "Some folks have them every Christmas, Uncle Sim says, but perhaps it isn't true. Go Bailey, do you believe there is really any Santa Claus such as Uncle Sim tells about, or did he make it all up? To be sure, he showed me a picture of him." "I know there is," said Go Bailey firmly, "because I've seen presents that he brought to boys and girls in the village." "Then why don't he ever come here and bring us some?" said Methuselah, as if a new idea had suddenly struck him. "Do you suppose it's because we're worse than any other boys in the world? She says we are sometimes. Or maybe he's too proud to stop at the poorhouse." "Perhaps he can't find the way," said Go Bailey, "because it's a pretty crooked road, you know." "I wish we lived where there was truly Christmas, like places where Uncle Sim has been. Don't you, Go Bailey? Maybe he makes them all up, though. It seems as if they are too good to be true." "I shouldn't wonder if you get a lots of plums in your porridge tomorrow and perhaps a piece of mince pie, and I'll ask her to let me take you up Three Pine Hill on the sled." Go Bailey always showed the bright side of things to Methuselah, and he had become so accustomed to looking for a bright side that he could find one when you would have thought there wasn't any there. And whenever he found a very big lump in his throat, he swallowed it for Methuselah's sake and pretended that he didn't see anything in the world to cry about. He had to go back to his shoveling then, but after he had started, he turned back to say, "When I'm a man, you shall have Christmases, Thusalie." As he was digging the very last shovelful of snow out of the path, he heard the jingle of bells and saw the butcher's wagon with the butcher's boy in front and other friends and more crammed in behind. They were evidently combining pleasure with business in the liveliest manner. Coming in the other direction from the village was a large Newfoundland dog with a basket in his mouth. Go Bailey liked dogs, and he was sure he was acquainted with everyone in the village, and he had never seen that dog before. The butcher's boy was driving recklessly and seemed to think it would be fun to make a sudden turn into the drifts through which the dog was bounding. The horse, taken by surprise and somewhat frightened, made a sudden plunge, and though Go Bailey could not quite see how it happened, it seemed that before the dog had come to get out of the way, the sled had gone over him, and he lay helpless and howling upon the snow. The sleigh drove on. Go Bailey was at his side in a moment, patting his shaggy plague head and calling him poor doggy and good doggy, and trying to discover how badly he was hurt. He came to the conclusion after a thorough examination that his leg was either broken or badly sprained, and Go Bailey was a judge of such things. He had once doctored a rooster's lame leg. He had also successfully treated a kitten with a sprained ankle, and he had seen the doctor in the village set a puppy's leg and had carefully watched the operation. He helped the dog along toward the house and managed at last to get the poor creature unobserved into the woodshed. He was very much afraid that Mrs. Pincham, if she should see him, would order him to leave the dog in the road. And he knew he could not bring him in beside the kitchen fire, for Mrs. Pincham would say she didn't want a dirty dog in her house. Go Bailey found it hard to decide whether the bone was broken or only out of place, but he made a sort of splint, such as he had seen the doctor use upon the puppy's leg, and then wound soft cloths, wet with liniment, about it, and the dog certainly seemed relieved, and licked Go Bailey's hand, and looked at him with grateful eyes. He ventured into the house after a while and beckoned to Methuselah to come out to the woodshed. Methuselah was convinced that Santa Claus had sent the dog to them as a Christmas present, and his delight was unbounded. Of course Santa Claus must have sent him, or why would he have come down this lowly road? And you will cure him, and perhaps she will let us keep him. But a sudden recollection had struck Go Bailey. The dog had been carrying a basket in his mouth. There might be something in it that would tell where he came from. He ran out and found the basket half buried in the snow where it had fallen from the dog's mouth. There were several letters and papers in it addressed to Dr. Carruthers, care of Richard Thorndyke, Esquire. Dr. Carruthers was the famous New York physician who was visiting Squire Thorndyke. The whole village had been talking about it. Although he had not really believed that Santa Claus sent the dog, Go Bailey did feel a pang of disappointment that they must part with him so soon. But then Mrs. Pincham would not have allowed them to keep him anyhow, and she might have had something even worse done to him. So Go Bailey made a bed of straw and soft cloth on the sled and lifted the dog into it. Methuselah stood in the shed door and looked after them, weeping, sadly making up his mind that Santa Claus was proud and would never come to the poorhouse. Go Bailey had never been inside Squire Thorndyke's gate before, and he went up to one of the doors with fear and trembling, fearing what the people at the door, the servants, might say about the town's poor coming. But once they heard about the dog, they raised a great cry and at once ushered Go Bailey into the presence of Squire Thorndyke and Dr. Carruthers, that he might tell them all that he knew of the accident. Dr. Carruthers was a big, jolly-looking man with white hair and a long white beard, just like pictures of Santa Claus. Go Bailey was sure that Methuselah would think he was Santa Claus if he could see him. After a few moments, Dr. Carruthers turned to Go Bailey and asked, "Who set the leg?" Go Bailey answered modestly that he fixed it as well as he could because there wasn't anybody else around. "How did you know how?" asked the doctor. And Go Bailey related his experiences with the rooster and the kitten and the puppy. Dr. Carruthers looked at him steadily out of a pair of eyes that were sharp, although very kind. Then he turned to Squire Thorndyke and said, "Oh, uncommon boy." And they stood talking in low tones for a few minutes. How Go Bailey's ears did burn. He wondered what Squire Thorndyke knew about him, and he thought of every prank he had ever played in his life. Go Bailey was an unusually good boy, but he had played a few pranks being a boy, and he thought that they were a great deal worse than they were, because Mrs. Pincham said so. And he imagined that Dr. Crothers was hearing all about them and would presently turn around and say that such a bad boy had no right to touch his dog, and that it was no more than he would expect from the town's poor. But instead of that, after several minutes' conversation with Squire Thorndyke, the doctor turned to Gobeiley and said, "I want an office boy, and I think you are just the boy to suit me. How would you like to come and live with me, and perhaps one of these days be a doctor yourself?" Gobeiley caught his breath. To go away from Mrs. Pincham, not be town's poor anymore, to learn to be a doctor? He had said once in Mrs. Pincham's hearing that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up, and she said sneeringly that town's poor weren't very likely to get a chance to learn to be doctors. And now the chance had come to him. Gobeiley thought it seemed like too much like heaven to be anything that could happen to a mere mortal boy. "Well, would you like to go?" said the doctor again. "Would I, sir? Wouldn't I?" said Gobeiley with a radiant face. But then the brightness suddenly faded from Gobeiley's face. He stood with his hands thrust into his trousers pockets, gazing irresolutely at the carpet. And what he saw was Thusely's pale, pinched face. It had risen before him even while the doctor was speaking. If he went away, who would take care of Thusely? And Thusely's heart would be broken. I can't go, sir. I forgot. No, I can't go," said Gobeiley. Oh, what a lump there was in his throat. He had swallowed many a lump for Thusely's sake, but that was the very biggest one. And then he turned and ran out of the house, and he ran all the way home. That night, something very unusual happened. Mrs. Pincham went to the village to a Christmas festival. She went before dark, and the spirits of everybody in that poorhouse rose as soon as she was out of sight. Mr. Pincham piled great logs upon the fireplace till there was such a roaring fire as had not been seen there for many a day. And then he told Joe and Gobeiley to go down cellar and bring up as many apples as they wanted to. And he found the key to the closet where the nuts were kept. And Sandy Gooding brought out some fine popcorn that he had saved up. And Joe Golightly brought out his violin, which, while it had a few broken strings, could yet cheer one up wonderfully. There was no present except for Thusely, who had a big red peppermint drop that Gobeiley brought him with a penny hoarded for 6 weeks. And it would have been a very pleasant evening if there had not been one great drawback. Mrs. Pincham had a way of pouncing upon people when they least expected her, and she seemed to have a sense of when people were having too good a time. Just as they had poured out a popper full of corn, and Uncle Sim was clearing his throat to begin a story, there came a knock upon the door. Everybody scrambled to hide the popcorn and the apples and the nuts. And then someone remembered. Never knocked. Mr. Pincham sat down again and said, "What is the matter with you all? Gobeiley opened the door." And Gobeiley did open the door, and who should be there but Squire Thorndyke and the city doctor. The moment Thusely saw Dr. Carruthers, he called out, "Santa Claus!" And the big doctor laughed and took a great package of candy out of his pocket and gave it to Thusely. "I'm so glad you've come," said Thusely confidentially. "And you look just like your picture. And I don't see why you never came before, for you don't seem proud. And we aren't such very bad boys. Anyway, Gobeiley isn't. Don't you believe what Mrs. Pincham tells you." The doctor laughed and said he was getting to be an old fellow, and the snow was deep, and it was hard for him to get about, but he was sorry that he had not come before, for they did look like very good boys. Then he asked Methuselah about his lameness and the pain in his side, and he said he ought to be sent to a certain hospital in New York where he might be cured. And then he asked if he had no relatives or friends. "I've got Gobeiley," said Thusely. The doctor turned and looked sharply at Gobeiley. "Is he the reason why you wouldn't go with me?" he asked. "He's such a little chap, and I'm all he's got," said Gobeiley. The doctor took out his handkerchief and said it was bad weather for colds. "Suppose I take him too," said he. This time, the lump in his throat fairly got the better of Gobeili. But Thusili clapped his hands for joy. He didn't understand what was to happen, only that Santa Claus was to take him somewhere with Gobeili. I told you that Santa Claus sent the dog. Now didn't I, Gobeili? The end. We'll finish our time together with this journal entry from Charles Brown, age 18, on his first voyage aboard the ship the Agate out of Newburyport, bound for Shanghai. Christmas, 1876. Today is Christmas, to all outward appearances the same as any other day. But we all seem to think of the past on days such as these. They are the milestones of our existence, and better thoughts and feelings animate us today than commonly. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men, has the same significance to us as to others who are in positions more to be enjoyed than ours. We had our last turkey for dinner. We had many fears and misgivings that whether he would survive the perils of sea until Christmas, but he was fat and good eating. Altogether, the day proved more pleasant than I anticipated, but I hope my next Christmas may be passed with friends and family at home. I think we can agree, after this year, that we echo Charles's sentiments and will be grateful for our blessings this Christmas, while hopefully anticipating that next year, the challenges and uncertainty of the past few months will be behind us, and we will be able to spend Christmas with our family and friends. I wish that for you. I wish that for me. I wish that for all of us. Have a joyous holiday season. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Anne. That was really wonderful, wonderful journey.
Thank you.
Now, if anybody, go ahead. Sorry.
Excuse me, where do we find this video?
Oh, I'll send it out to everyone who registered. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Anne, for allowing us to record it as well. I'm
Sure
sure
thing.
that there will be more people that weren't able to join us tonight on the night will be able to enjoy it tomorrow or on Christmas Day, which will be very nice for them too.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah. Did anyone else have any questions? We had one comment here that says, thank you for sharing the world's traditions with us. You have a beautiful singing voice and fun way to share this holiday season and appreciate different cultures and special celebrations. So that was really excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did anyone else have any questions tonight?
I have one more thing. So, like, this video will be posted?
Yes, I will put it up on YouTube, and I will share it to everybody who registered tonight. Okay. Okay, well, with that, I guess we'll say thank you so much for your time tonight, Ms. Barrett, and I really hope that we can have you back for another one of your excellent programs. And I wish everybody a happy, safe, and warm holiday. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you, you too.
Bye now. Good night.